In the closing months of the Second World War, as Allied armies pushed deeper into German territory, the technological evolution of armored warfare reached a dramatic crescendo. The European theater had become a proving ground for the most advanced tanks ever produced, machines that represented the culmination of years of desperate innovation, industrial might, and tactical adaptation. Among these steel-leviathans, two tanks stood as symbols of their respective nations' approaches to armored combat. The German Tiger II, known to the Allies as the King Tiger, embodied the Third Reich's philosophy of overwhelming firepower and nearly impenetrable armor, a fortress on tracks that struck terror into the hearts of Allied tank crews. Facing this behemoth was America's answer to the German heavy tank problem, the M26 Pershing, a vehicle that represented a fundamental shift in American tank doctrine, and arrived on the battlefield at a moment when such a weapon was desperately needed. On October 26, 1944, these two machines would meet in combat, and the outcome of their encounter would resonate through the final months of the war in Europe. To understand the significance of this engagement, we must first examine the context in which it occurred and the evolutionary paths that brought both tanks to that moment in history. The American approach to tank warfare throughout the early years of World War II had been predicated on a doctrine that separated tanks into two distinct categories. Medium tanks like the M4 Sherman were designed for infantry support and exploitation, machines built for reliability, ease of production, and adequate performance across a range of combat scenarios. The Sherman had served admirably in North Africa, Italy, and the hedgerows of Normandy, proving itself a versatile and dependable weapon system. However, the Sherman possessed a critical weakness that became increasingly apparent as the war progressed: its 75 mm main gun. While adequate against early war German armor and excellent for supporting infantry, with high explosive rounds, struggled to penetrate the frontal armor of Germany's newer heavy tanks. The Panther, and especially the Tiger I, could engage Shermans at ranges where the American tanks could not effectively return fire, creating a dangerous disparity in combat effectiveness. American doctrine had assigned the task of dealing with enemy tanks to specialized tank destroyer units, vehicles like the M10 and M18 that sacrificed armor protection for mobility and powerful guns. This separation of roles made sense on paper, but in the fluid, chaotic environment of actual combat, it created serious problems. Sherman crews found themselves facing Tiger and Panther tanks without adequate means to defend themselves, forced to rely on flanking maneuvers, numerical superiority, and sheer courage to overcome technologically superior opponents. The psychological impact of this situation cannot be overstated. American tankers knew that in a head-to-head engagement with German heavy armor, they were at a severe disadvantage. Reports from the European theater became increasingly urgent. Frontline commanders demanded a tank that could meet German armor on equal terms, a vehicle with sufficient armor protection and firepower to engage the enemy's best tanks and survive. The development of what would become the M26 Pershing began as a response to these desperate field reports. American tank designers and military planners had actually begun work on heavy tank concepts earlier in the war. But bureaucratic inertia, competing priorities, and a belief that the Sherman was adequate for American needs had delayed serious development efforts. The T-20 series of medium tanks represented early attempts to create a Sherman successor, incorporating lessons learned from combat experience. These experimental vehicles featured improved armor layouts, more powerful engines, and better suspensions. The T-23 variant introduced an electric drive system and mounted a 76 mm gun, representing a step forward in American tank design. However, even as these prototypes underwent testing, it became clear that incremental improvements would not be sufficient. The appearance of the Panther tank in significant numbers during 1943 forced a reassessment of American armor requirements. The Panther combined heavy armor, a powerful long-barreled 75 mm gun, and reasonable mobility, creating a vehicle that outclassed anything in the American arsenal. The T-25 and T-26 programs pushed American heavy tank development in a more aggressive direction. These designs incorporated thicker armor, more powerful guns, and larger chassis to support the increased weight. The T-26E3, which would be standardized as the M26 Pershing, mounted a 90 mm gun, the same weapon used in the M36 tank destroyer. This gun fired a 24-pound armor-piercing projectile at approximately 2,800 feet per second, giving it the penetrating power necessary to defeat German heavy armor at combat ranges. The Pershing's armor protection represented a significant improvement over the Sherman as well. The frontal hull armor measured 4 inches thick, while the turret front reached 4 inches as well, providing protection against most German tank guns at typical combat ranges. The vehicle weighed 46 tons, substantially heavier than the Sherman's 33 tons, requiring a more powerful engine and improved suspension to maintain acceptable mobility. The decision to rush the Pershing into production and deploy it to Europe reflected the urgency of the situation facing American armored forces. By late 1944, as Allied armies approached Germany's borders, the intensity of tank combat increased dramatically. The Germans, fighting on their own territory with shortened supply lines, could concentrate their remaining armor reserves at critical points. American tank units faced not only Tigers and Panthers but also the newest and most formidable German tank to reach production, the Tiger II. This machine represented the ultimate expression of German heavy tank philosophy, and understanding its capabilities is essential to appreciating the significance of the engagement that would occur on October 26, 1944. The Tiger II, designated Panzerkampfwagen BH Tiger II Ausweg B, emerged from a German design philosophy that prioritized protection and firepower above all other considerations. The vehicle mounted the fearsome 88 mm Quake 43 L71 gun, one of the most powerful tank weapons ever deployed during World War II. This long-barreled cannon could penetrate over 7 inches of armor at 1,000 yards, making it capable of defeating any Allied tank at extreme ranges. The Tiger II's armor protection was equally impressive. The frontal hull armor measured 150 mm thick and was sloped at 50 degrees from vertical, creating an effective thickness far greater than the actual armor plate. The turret front reached 180 mm of thickness, making it virtually impervious to frontal attack by any Allied tank gun in service during 1944. The vehicle weighed 68 tons fully loaded, making it the heaviest tank to see widespread service during the war. This enormous weight created serious mobility problems. The Maybach HL-230P 30 engine, essentially the same power plant used in the lighter Panther tank, struggled to move the Tiger II's bulk at any reasonable speed. Maximum road speed was listed as 25 miles per hour, but actual cross-country performance was much lower. The transmission, final drives, and suspension components experienced chronic reliability problems due to the extreme stress of moving such a heavy vehicle. Despite these mechanical shortcomings, the Tiger II inspired near mythical fear among Allied tank crews. Its combination of devastating firepower and impenetrable armor made it a fortress on tracks, capable of dominating any battlefield where it appeared. The psychological impact of encountering a King Tiger in combat went beyond simple calculations of armor, thickness, and gun penetration. Allied tankers knew that their standard tactics, weapons, and vehicles were inadequate against this monster. Intelligence reports describing the Tiger II's capabilities created a sense of dread among American and British armored units. The Germans deployed Tiger IIs in heavy tank battalions, typically equipped with 45 vehicles organized into 3 companies. These units functioned as fire brigades, rushed to threatened sectors to provide an armored shield for defensive operations, or to spearhead crucial attacks. By October 1944, Germany had produced approximately 400 Tiger IIs, a substantial number though far fewer than the thousands of Panthers and older Tigers in service. The specific engagement between an M26 Pershing and a Tiger II on October 26, 1944, occurred during a particularly fluid phase of the fighting in Western Europe. However, we must pause here to examine a critical historical detail. The date of October 26, 1944, presents a significant chronological problem when examined against the established historical record of M26 Pershing deployments. The first M26 Pershing tanks did not arrive in Europe until January 1945, when a small number of T-26E3 vehicles, the designation these tanks carried before official standardization, were shipped to the European Theater of Operations as part of the Zebra mission. This special program aimed to rush 20 Pershings to frontline units for combat evaluation under battlefield conditions. The tanks were distributed to several armored divisions, with the 3rd and 9th Armored Divisions receiving the first vehicles. The famous engagement between a Pershing and a Tiger II actually occurred in early March 1945, not October 1944, and it took place in Cologne, Germany, not during the autumn fighting of 1944. This engagement in Cologne represents one of the most dramatic and well-documented tank duels of World War II, and its actual circumstances deserve detailed examination. The 3rd Armored Division, spearheading the American drive into Germany's industrial heartland, entered the outskirts of Cologne in early March 1945. The city, devastated by years of Allied bombing, presented a nightmarish environment for tank operations. Rubble-choked streets created narrow defiles where armored vehicles lost their mobility advantage. Buildings provided countless hiding places for German infantry armed with Panzerfaust, anti-tank rockets. The risk of ambush lurked around every corner, and American commanders approached the urban fighting with appropriate caution. Task Force Wellborn, a combined arms formation, built around elements of the 32nd Armored Regiment, pushed into the city's western suburbs. Among the tanks in this task force was a Pershing that had been assigned the nickname Fireball, crewed by men who represented the best trained tankers in the U.S. Army. The crew of Fireball had received specialized training on the new Pershing. Before deploying to Europe, they understood that their tank represented something special, a weapon that finally gave American tankers parity with German heavy armor. The commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver functioned as a cohesive team, their movements practiced and synchronized through countless hours of drill and training. The 90 gun they operated was a precision instrument capable of accuracy at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards in open terrain. The fire control system, while primitive by later standards, incorporated improvements over earlier American tanks. The gunner used a telescopic sight with graduated range scales, allowing for precise aiming once the range to target had been determined. The commander had access to periscopes providing all-around vision, critical for maintaining situational awareness in the close terrain of urban combat. As Task Force Wellborn advanced through Cologne streets on March 6, 1945, the Americans encountered increasingly desperate German resistance. Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS units, fighting for every block and building, used the rubble to their advantage. The sound of American tanks approaching triggered a practiced response from German defenders. Anti-tank teams moved into position, waiting for the vulnerable moment when a tank exposed its flanks or thinner rear armor. Machine gun teams prepared to rake any infantry supporting the tanks, attempting to separate the American armor from its protective screen of riflemen. In this deadly environment, the sudden appearance of a Tiger II represented a catastrophic threat. The German tank, positioned in a defensive location that allowed it to command a long sightline down one of Cologne's streets, possessed every tactical advantage. The circumstances of the engagement unfolded with brutal speed. As Fireball and other American tanks advanced, they entered a sector where a Tiger II had taken a position. The exact positioning remains a matter of detailed historical analysis based on combat reports, after-action reviews, and the remarkable fact that a U.S. Army camera crew captured portions of this engagement on film, creating one of the most extraordinary pieces of combat footage from World War II. The Tiger II, a vehicle from the 5/6th Heavy Panzer Battalion, had positioned itself to cover an approach route into the German-held portion of the city. German doctrine for Tiger employment emphasized using these powerful tanks in defensive positions that maximized their range advantage and armor protection, while minimizing their mobility limitations. A well-positioned Tiger could control a substantial area. Its long-barreled 88 gun, capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges where return fire would be ineffective. The American column, moving cautiously through the urban terrain, became aware of the Tiger II's presence through the sudden, violent destruction of one of their tanks. The German gunner, skilled in the employment of his weapon, had fired with devastating effect. The psychological shock of seeing a friendly tank brew up flames and smoke pouring from the stricken vehicle focused the attention of every American tanker in the column. They knew immediately what they faced. The distinctive silhouette of the Tiger II, with its massive turret and long gun barrel, was unmistakable. Standard American doctrine for dealing with German heavy tanks called for maneuvering to achieve flanking shots while fixing the enemy's attention with frontal fire. In the confined streets of Cologne, such maneuvers were difficult or impossible. The Tiger II held the advantage of position, its frontal armor proof against most American weapons. But Fireball was not equipped with most American weapons. The Pershing's 90 gun represented a quantum leap in American tank firepower, and the crew understood that they possessed, for perhaps the first time in the war, a weapon capable of defeating a King Tiger in frontal combat. The engagement that followed tested every aspect of their training, courage, and the technical capabilities of their tank. The ranges involved in this urban engagement were relatively short by open field standards, but still represented a significant challenge for accurate gunnery under combat stress. Estimates placed the initial engagement range at approximately 900 to 1,200 yards, a distance where the Tiger II's armor would be at its most effective, but also where the Pershing's 90 gun could potentially achieve penetration with proper shot placement. The Pershing's gunner acquired the target, centering the reticle of his telescopic sight on the massive form of the Tiger II. The calculations for a successful engagement required consideration of multiple factors. Range estimation was critical, as the trajectory of the armor-piercing projectile followed a curved path, dropping due to gravity over distance. The gunner needed to account for this drop by elevating the gun barrel appropriately. Wind at longer ranges could deflect the projectile, though in urban terrain surrounded by buildings, this factor was less significant. The angle of the target relative to Fireball's position affected the effective thickness of the Tiger II's armor. A perfectly perpendicular impact would have the best chance of penetration, while an oblique angle would increase the effective armor thickness and could cause the projectile to deflect. The specific type of ammunition loaded also mattered significantly. American 90 ammunition included several types, with the M82 armor-piercing ballistic cap round being the standard anti-armor projectile during this period. The first shot fired by Fireball struck the Tiger II, but failed to penetrate. The impact, visible in the combat footage that captured this engagement, created a shower of sparks and debris but did not disable the German tank. This result was not entirely surprising given the extraordinary armor protection of the Tiger II's frontal arc. The German crew, now fully aware of the American tank threatening them, attempted to return fire. The Tiger II's gunner traversed the massive turret, bringing the 88 gun to bear on the Pershing. This moment represented the ultimate test of both tanks' design philosophies and their crews' skills. The Tiger II's gun had superior penetrating power and should have been capable of destroying the Pershing with a single well-placed hit. However, the American tank's smaller size and more compact design made it a more difficult target. Additionally, the stress of combat, the confined urban environment, and possibly damage to the Tiger II's optics or fire control systems may have affected the German gunner's accuracy. The exchange of fire continued, with both tanks maneuvering within the limited space available to them. The Pershing's crew, demonstrating remarkable composure under fire, adjusted their aim based on the observation of their first shot's impact. The loader, working in the confined space of the turret, extracted a fresh 90 round from the ready rack and rammed it into the breech. The gunner made corrections to his aim point, possibly targeting a specific area of the Tiger II's frontal armor, where the protection might be marginally weaker, or where previous damage might have created a vulnerability. The commander, maintaining communication with the rest of the crew and monitoring the tactical situation, made the critical decisions about positioning and engagement tactics. The second shot from fireballs struck the Tiger II with devastating effect. The armor-piercing projectile, traveling at nearly half a mile per second, impacted the German tank's armor with tremendous kinetic energy. The penetration of armor by kinetic energy projectiles involves a complex interaction of forces. The projectile must first survive the initial impact without shattering, a requirement that led to the development of armor-piercing cap designs that cushioned the initial shock. The projectile then must defeat the armor through a combination of crushing, cracking, and pushing the armor material aside. The Tiger II's armor, while extremely thick, was not invulnerable to weapons of sufficient power, striking at appropriate angles. The 90 mm projectile punched through the German tank's armor, and the consequences inside the vehicle would have been catastrophic. When an armor-piercing projectile penetrates a tank's armor, it creates what is known as spalling, where fragments of the armor plate, along with portions of the projectile itself, are driven into the crew compartment at high velocity. These fragments act as secondary projectiles, striking crew members, equipment, ammunition, and fuel systems. The Tiger II, for all its formidable armor protection, contained the same vulnerable internal components as any other tank. Ammunition stored throughout the vehicle represented a particular hazard. A single fragment striking a propellant charge or explosive filler in a shell could trigger a catastrophic ammunition explosion. Similarly, damage to fuel systems could start fires that, in the confined space of a tank, became infernos within seconds. The Tiger II, struck by Fireball's second 90 mm round, was effectively destroyed as a fighting vehicle. Whether through immediate crew casualties, critical damage to internal systems, or fire, the German tank ceased to function. The crew, if they survived the initial penetration, would have attempted to evacuate the vehicle through its hatches, a desperate escape from a steel coffin that had become a death trap. The psychological impact of this engagement extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. American tankers who witnessed or heard about the encounter gained confidence from the knowledge that they finally possessed a tank capable of defeating Germany's most powerful armor. The symbolic importance of an American tank destroying a Tiger II in frontal combat represented a turning point in the armored warfare of the European campaign. The technical specifications that enabled this victory deserve detailed analysis. The M26 Pershing's 90 mm M3 gun fired the M82 armor-piercing projectile at a muzzle velocity of approximately 2,800 feet per second. At 1,000 yards, this projectile retained sufficient energy to penetrate approximately 6.7 inches of homogeneous armor plate at a perpendicular angle. The Tiger II's frontal hull armor, while 150 mm thick, was sloped at 50 degrees from vertical. This slope increased the effective thickness to approximately 9.5 inches. However, armor penetration calculations are complex and involve factors beyond simple thickness measurements. The quality of the armor steel, the angle of impact, the specific design of the projectile, and even variations in armor hardness across a plate all affect penetration performance. It is likely that the killing shot struck the Tiger II at a point where the armor configuration was more vulnerable, possibly the turret front, where the massive gun mantelet created a complex geometry, or perhaps a section weakened by previous combat damage. The Pershing's own armor protection, while inferior to the Tiger II in absolute terms, provided adequate protection for the engagement ranges typical of the fighting in Germany during 1945. The 4-inch frontal armor could defeat most German tank guns at ranges beyond 500 yards, though the 88 mm gun of the Tiger II remained a serious threat at any range. The Pershing's design incorporated sloped armor on the hull front, increasing the effective thickness and creating a greater chance of projectile deflection. The tank's relatively compact dimensions, compared to the massive Tiger II, made it a more difficult target to hit, particularly in the confused environment of urban combat. Beyond the immediate tactical outcome, this engagement revealed important truths about armored warfare in the final months of World War II. The German doctrine of building massively armored and armed heavy tanks had reached a point of diminishing returns. The Tiger II's mechanical unreliability, extreme weight, and enormous consumption of fuel made it increasingly difficult to employ effectively as German logistics collapsed under the weight of Allied air superiority and the advancing Soviet and Western Allied armies. A Tiger II that broke down due to transmission failure or ran out of fuel represented a catastrophic loss, as these vehicles were often impossible to recover and repair under battlefield conditions. The Germans destroyed more Tiger IIs themselves to prevent capture than were knocked out by Allied action. The American approach, represented by the Pershing, offered a more balanced solution to the armored warfare problem. While the Pershing could not match the Tiger II's armor protection or the extreme penetrating power of its 88 mm gun, it combined sufficient firepower and armor with better mechanical reliability and more reasonable logistics requirements. A Pershing consumed fuel at a rate the American logistics system could easily support. When mechanical problems occurred, the Pershing could be repaired with readily available parts and tools. The tank's design emphasized practical combat effectiveness, rather than absolute superiority in isolated performance metrics. The crew training and tactical doctrine supporting American armor operations also played a crucial role in the Pershing's success. American tankers benefited from extensive training programs that emphasized crew coordination, maintenance procedures, and tactical flexibility. The combined arms doctrine that integrated tanks with infantry, artillery, and air support gave American armor significant advantages even when individual vehicles were outmatched by German counterparts. The engagement in Cologne demonstrated that when American tankers had equipment comparable to German heavy armor, their training and tactical skills could produce victory even in unfavorable circumstances. The strategic context of March 1945 frames this engagement in ways that emphasize its significance. Germany's defeat was inevitable by this point in the war. Allied armies were driving into the Reich from east and west, crushing German resistance through overwhelming superiority in numbers, logistics, and industrial production. The Tiger II, magnificent as it was as a weapons system, represented a technology that Germany could not produce in sufficient numbers to affect the war's outcome. The few hundred Tiger IIs built during 1944 and 1945 faced thousands of Allied tanks, supported by complete air supremacy and virtually unlimited ammunition and fuel supplies. Each Tiger II destroyed represented an irreplaceable loss for the German war machine. The Pershing's arrival in Europe, while too late to affect the war's ultimate outcome, validated the American industrial and military systems' ability to adapt and respond to battlefield challenges. The development cycle from initial concept through testing, production, and deployment demonstrated organizational capabilities that ultimately proved more important than any single weapon system. The United States possessed the industrial capacity to design, test, and produce a new heavy tank while simultaneously maintaining production of existing vehicles, conducting the largest amphibious invasion in history, supporting multiple active combat fronts around the world, and developing revolutionary new weapons like the atomic bomb. The engagement between Fireball and the Tiger II in Cologne also highlights the intensely personal nature of armored combat. Inside each of these metal machines were 5 human beings facing death with every second of combat. The stress experienced by tank crews during battle defies easy description. The confined space of a tank interior, filled with the mechanical noise of the engine and the acrid smell of gun smoke, became a chamber of terror when enemy fire began to arrive. The sound of projectiles striking armor, even if they failed to penetrate, created tremendous psychological pressure. Crew members knew that a single successful penetration could kill them all instantly, or, worse, trap them in a burning vehicle. The courage required to continue functioning under these conditions, to make calculated decisions and execute precise mechanical tasks, while facing imminent death, marks these men as exceptional. The German crew of the Tiger II faced particularly difficult circumstances during the final months of the war. They were defending their homeland against invasion, fighting in a cause that was clearly lost, but unable to simply surrender without betraying their comrades and, in their minds, their duty. The ideological indoctrination of Wehrmacht, and especially Waffen-SS troops, created soldiers who often fought with desperate intensity even in hopeless situations. The crew of this particular Tiger II, positioned in Cologne to delay the American advance, were performing their mission exactly as doctrine prescribed. They had taken up a strong defensive position, used their vehicle's superior firepower to destroy at least one American tank, and engaged the enemy with the professionalism expected of experienced tank crews. That they ultimately lost the engagement reflects not personal failure but the overwhelming material and numerical superiority facing German forces by March 1945. The photographic record of this engagement provides historians with an invaluable resource for understanding the reality of armored combat. The film footage, shot by an army cameraman who accompanied the American forces, captures moments of actual combat with an immediacy that written accounts cannot match. We can see the Pershing maneuvering through the rubble-filled streets, the crew visible through open hatches as they scan for threats. The footage shows the moment of fire, the recoil of the 90 gun rocking the Pershing back on its suspension. Most dramatically, the film captures the Tiger II itself, the massive tank sitting in the street, smoke beginning to rise from its engine deck as internal fires take hold. This visual evidence transformed an engagement that might have been forgotten or misremembered into one of the most thoroughly documented tank duels of World War II. The lessons learned from this engagement influenced American armor development in the years following World War II. The Pershing, initially classified as a heavy tank, was reclassified as a medium tank as American doctrine evolved to reflect the understanding that the vehicle's capabilities represented the new baseline for main battle tanks. The M26 served as the foundation for a family of vehicles that included the M46 and M47 tanks, which saw service in Korea and with allied nations around the world. The 90 gun proved its worth in combat and continued in service for many years, demonstrating that the leap in firepower from the Sherman's 75 to the Pershing's 90 had been appropriate and necessary. The engagement also validated the Zebra mission's approach of rushing new equipment to combat units for battlefield evaluation. The data gathered from the Pershing's combat employment in Europe informed future tank development programs and provided invaluable feedback for improving training, tactics, and technical specifications. American military leadership learned that sometimes rapid deployment of adequate numbers of good equipment was more valuable than delayed deployment of marginally superior systems. The Pershing, while not perfect, arrived in time to provide meaningful combat service and demonstrated capabilities that justified its development and production. In the broader narrative of World War II's armored warfare, the Pershing versus Tiger II engagement stands as a symbol of the technological evolution that defined the conflict. From the primitive tanks of 1939 through the sophisticated armor of 1945, the war drove an unprecedented acceleration in military technology. Each nation approached the challenge of armored warfare differently, reflecting their industrial capabilities, tactical doctrine, and strategic requirements. The German emphasis on quality and technological superiority produced magnificent weapons, like the Tiger II, but in numbers too small to achieve strategic success. The American emphasis on mass production, reliability, and adequate performance produced vehicles like the Sherman that, while individually outmatched by German heavy armor, won through sheer numbers and logistical sustainability. The Pershing represented an evolution in American thinking, a recognition that technological parity with the enemy's best weapons was achievable without sacrificing the mass production and reliability advantages that characterized American industry. The crews who fought in these vehicles on both sides of the conflict deserve recognition for their courage and professionalism. They operated complex machines under extraordinarily dangerous conditions, making split-second decisions that determined life or death for themselves and their comrades. The psychological burden of knowing that a single mistake or moment of bad luck could result in incineration inside a burning tank must have been crushing. Yet they continued to fight, mission after mission, engagement after engagement, until the war finally ended or death claimed them. The engagement in Cologne was just one moment in a vast conflict that consumed millions of lives and reshaped the world, but for the men involved, it represented the defining experience of their lives, a few minutes of terror and violence that would haunt their memories forever.